For me, it was specifically in my family, our relationship to my grandparents on my mom's side, who were very conservative, had very strong opinions about what you should and shouldn't do based on their religious beliefs and also just their opinions that they felt like were facts. And so there was a lot of, hey, this is a thing we're not going to talk about around grandma and grandpa. Or if they ask about this topic, have an answer prepared, like what church you're going to now that you've moved to LA or something, to just be like, we don't want to deal with it, so let's just not. And that was like, that's how we did it for all of my life that I can remember, right? And obviously the things we might be dishonest about changed over time. But there was this sense of like, this is just not worth it. You're going to make it hard for all of us. So let's just all avoid these things or lie a little bit about these things, whatever it is. Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
Things I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about what makes it difficult to be honest with a partner. Whether it's sharing a negative opinion you have about something they did, or if it's about disclosing information about other relationships, or if you've experienced a partner omitting information, we've all had difficulty making the call of when to be forthright and when to keep our mouths shut. So today we're going to dive into what the research says about what gets in the way of being honest in relationships, as well as tools to help you feel more comfortable being open and honest with someone that you love. If you're interested in learning about our fundamental communication tools that we reference all the time on this show, you can check out our book, Multiamory: Essential Tools for Modern Relationships, which covers some of our most used communication tools for all types of relationships. You can find links to buy it at multiamory.com/book or wherever you get your books. Also, you can check out the first 9 episodes of this podcast where we cover some of our most widely used and shared communication tools.
So I've never told a lie to a partner, so I don't really know what the experience is like, but I'm just wondering, for the two of you, if you've ever, I assume you've told so many lies to partners in the past, what's motivated you to lie or to omit information to somebody that you love?
Self-preservation.
Yeah, I think like embarrassment.
I would weigh, I'm just thinking about a particular relationship, the pros and cons of saying the thing and how it would be received. And if I felt it would be received negatively, then I would probably omit or maybe white lie it or try not to talk about it or skew the truth slightly out of self-preservation. And I think my self-preservation meter is fairly high sometimes. But it also is in the context of the relationship. I think that in certain relationships, if there is a narrative of if I say something and it's not taken well, then that's going to be really bad potentially. Then the self-preservation goes up and maybe the omission goes up as well.
The omission meter goes up?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Jase, you said embarrassment.
Like if it's something that I'm embarrassed about, there's that temptation to be like, I'd rather just pretend it never happened rather than needing to talk about it. I think that's come up. I can also think of times where I've been less than honest because I haven't been sure if it would actually just hurt them more than the good it would do, or like, is it something that actually needs to be shared or not? Like if it's, I don't like this particular thing or something, it's like, when do you share that and when do you just say, well, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it so much. And sometimes I've made the wrong choice where then later it's like, now I can't deal with this thing and it's been too long that I haven't said anything. And so now I'm stuck, right? That's the trap, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've definitely felt both of those things that you're sharing, the self-preservation and the embarrassment. I mean, I would feel those things if I'd ever told a lie. I think that would be part of my motivation. Also, maybe part of my motivation might be maybe a sense of just not wanting to deal with whatever the consequences might be of being honest. Whether it is, I think, like you're sharing, Emily, like maybe this fear that my partner's going to have a really bad reaction that's going to be destructive or maybe really bad for me, or all the way up to maybe this might hurt their feelings, maybe this might make them uncomfortable. I'd rather not have to caretake them through that. And so I'm just going to not, it's kind of like these different flavors of motivation there. I want to hone in on specifically the non-monogamy angle here, that I know I've definitely struggled with this in the past, and like a lot of people want very clear rules of like what information do I disclose and what information do I not disclose about other partnerships or like between partners or things like that. Like, and this adds a whole other layer of where we don't necessarily have this very clear manual about sharing information. We don't have the scripts about how to talk to a partner about other partnerships. And so things get a little murky.
I would use the word minimizing sometimes when it comes to not necessarily omission, but like minimizing the truth, especially early on in non-monogamous relationships or early on in one's non-monogamous journey. If you have started dating someone and are really falling for them or really having like very intense feelings, you may want to minimize that to another partner because you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to tell them like, oh yeah, I'm having such an amazing time, because that might be challenging for them to hear, for example. So yeah, that is a question of what is the right way to gauge how they're going to feel and how intensely I should be sharing my feelings towards another person.
I think another one with that, whether you're monogamous or not, but if you've said, we want to be honest about if you feel attraction for someone else, like be honest about that, whether or not we agree that's something you would act on in our relationship. I think even then it's like, well, is it anytime I ever feel attraction to anyone? Is it only when it's above a certain strength level? Is it only when I do want to do something about it? Because otherwise it's like, is it just weird to be telling you that all the time when you're just thinking like, oh gosh, you really want to be with all these other people, when maybe it's more just, no, I just happened to feel some attraction for a second there. So like knowing where to share there is also a tricky one, I think.
Yeah, I've seen people, again, create some agreements around that maybe started with good intentions, but then in practice fall apart a little bit around, well, be honest with me when you're starting to develop feelings for someone, or be honest with me when you think the relationship is becoming more serious. I think our logical cognitive brains can think, oh yeah, totally, I can be honest about that. I want to be honest about that. I want to keep my partner in the loop about how things are developing. But again, there isn't necessarily a switch that flips when you're emotionally starting to entangle with someone and evaluating whether this is going to turn into a more quote unquote serious relationship or not, that can be a complicated process. And so then I've seen people get mad at their partners when it's like, you told me that it wasn't serious, or you didn't tell me that it was serious, and now all of a sudden it is. And like, I don't, when this gets really muddy sometimes. And sometimes people can get really, really hurt and feel really, really betrayed and like genuinely feel lied to when maybe that wasn't necessarily where their partner was coming from.
It wasn't the intention. I think that's the challenging thing, is like, if you can find the intention behind something and lead with that, and again, assume good intention, then that's a great place from which to start. But often it's really difficult to do that, especially when like really intense emotions are involved.
Yeah. So I want to start laying out what we're talking about when we're talking about dishonesty and honesty. I really loved, when I was doing the research for this episode, this quote. It was from this 2010 study by Bergen and Levine that was about deception in romantic relationships. And this is how they defined it. Deception comes in a variety of guises, from flat-out lies, elaborate fabrications, misdirection and exaggerations, to evasions, equivocations, concealments, omissions, strategic ambiguity, to more subtle misdirection and camouflage. Now, with that broad of a list, I'm like, well, that's everybody, right?
I know,
like,
that's all the time.
We've all grabbed for one of those tools from the toolbox at some point.
Well, we're constantly making these little calculations at any given time, like, how is a person going to react to the thing that I say? And what is the truth? Like, what is truth here? And not to get all esoteric about it, but I do think that it's an important thing to think about, given whomever you're standing in front of and whatever it is that you're going to say to that person, especially if it's a really emotionally charged or fraught topic.
Well, and also I think when we're talking about emotions, like developing feelings for someone, we can kind of be ambiguous on even knowing how to
It's
describe
true.
how we're feeling.
Good
Because like
point.
I'm still trying to figure that out. And it's like, well, is my partner being ambiguous because they're trying to figure it out? Or are they being ambiguous because they're trying to hide something from me? And that, or am I being honest with myself about this, or am I being ambiguous because I'm not sure? Like that's a tough question.
So let's talk about honesty. And I'm going to spend some time talking about this 2014 study by Roggensack and Sillers is titled Agreement and Understanding About Honesty and Deception Rules in Romantic Relationships. This was published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. So this study was somewhat small. Common trap that a lot of studies fall into is mostly white, hetero college student couples. But what I liked about this study is that they identified an interesting distinction between what they call obligatory honesty versus discretionary honesty. And this was all generated from, interviews with their research subjects. So for instance, obligatory honesty included these statements that people would make, like, my partner and I should disclose where we are at financially, or my partner and I should be honest with each other about needing time alone, or my partner is not allowed to check my personal stuff, such as text messages or my computer, without permission. And this, of course, ran the range where it also got a little bit controlling in some of these, like, I should know where my partner is at all times. Or if my partner spends any time with the opposite sex, I should know about it. Yeah, this was all from people's like real relationships, So of course it's going to run the range and be subjective of what are the areas where people think like it is obligatory to be honest.
Okay, so like these are the things that they kind of self-identified as this is a thing that should always be true. Is that kind of the idea? Like this, I should always have honesty about this thing.
About these,
Right.
It's an obligation to be honest about X, Y, and Z topic. And again, that was subjective. That kind of was different in each relationship. And now this was different from discretionary honesty, which is a little bit of like whether or not you're honest sort of depends on the context. So for instance, there were these statements like, I don't need to know everything that my partner is doing daily. Or it's okay that we don't disclose everything about our past history to each other. Or sharing genuine emotions is not necessary all the time. And again, like, of course, it starts to get into certain weird areas, like it's okay to fudge the details if it would cause conflict. Now, this one was interesting. This was a direct quote. We can keep secrets if it wouldn't hurt the relationship, but we should share them if it would strengthen the relationship, which is yet like so subjective.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it may be subjective for one person in the relationship versus the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's really tough. How do you know? You'd have to know your partner so well to know
Super well. Yes.
and to at least have an idea of what their reaction would be to that thing that is a secret.
Yes. But the whole point is it lays out that in each relationship, it seems like people bring to it a certain set of expectations about honesty, where some things are like, yes, you have to be honest. And then other things, it's like, it maybe kind of depends on the context. I was curious about what y'all felt about that.
The one that really got me here was the sharing genuine emotions is not necessary all the time. And to that, I would say, yeah, I agree. Because sometimes you do diminish an emotion because you realize it's really going to be difficult for your partner to handle it in the moment.
Sure.
And I think that's true with a lot of things, but it just made me think of if I am really upset in a moment, I may not tell my partner that. I may instead simmer down or halt because I don't want to get in a situation where I'm going to also be engaging my partner in a way that would cause them a huge amount of upset as well. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster. So, like, is that dishonesty? Like, we talked about radical honesty in an episode before, and this idea that, yeah, we always have to be honest or not. And I don't know if that's necessarily the wisest thing to do at all times. So discretionary honesty, I do think sometimes is probably a wise choice, a wise place to go to.
I have a good example of this from a client, specifically about this sharing genuine emotions, maybe falling under that discretionary honesty category, where he was going through a situation where a partner of his was going through a breakup with another partner. And he was having some feelings about it because he was kind of having, I think, a lot of like anger and resentment around the experiences that he had while his partner was in this other relationship and the ways that it affected him. So it's kind of like he also had his own almost like process going through the breakup, but he knew, he was like, this is going to take her a while to emotionally recover from this. This is very devastating. And so it is not my time to be bringing this to her. You know, like I'm going to be a supportive partner and I'm going to be there for her and I'm going to listen to her and like help hold her feelings in space. And he was coming to me, right, to process his own emotions, which is, it was a good idea, you know, to
That's wise.
have a place to go, right? But he knew that like now is not the time to just be vomiting all over in a radically honest way the ways he was feeling about the whole situation, because he knew that it was going to interfere with his partner's ability to process and heal from the breakup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of several examples of that where it's like, yeah, I guess that question of, is this my time to share how I'm feeling? And I think that's kind of the criticism that I brought up previously about radical honesty as an approach, because sometimes I've seen it lead to that, well, this is my excuse to just overshare and always make it about whatever I think and whatever I feel, which can be a really selfish way to go about your relationships. And I'm thinking too of people I know who, radical honesty aside, who just cannot hold their tongue when they have an opinion about something, even when that is not helping anybody. And it's not even in the case where it's like, oh, this is something like I need help processing. Because I can understand that. I can relate to that. I still think there are times where it's better to wait and find a different outlet for that instead of maybe your partner who's going through something much harder than you are even. At the same time, I don't like the kind of traditional thing of, you know, if I think about like a Mad Men type thing of this kind of keep all of your feelings away from your partner and like don't let them see anything but this kind of polished veneer. And instead, you just kind of go off the deep end in what you do in the rest of your life. That's not good either. So again, it's like if you're looking for an absolute rule to follow, I don't think you're going to find it here.
Well, okay, but I'm curious, though, that if we can accept that broadly, this is subjective, this is personal, this is unique to each relationship for people to figure out what are the things that we think should be obligatory to be honest about and what are the things that we think are discretionary, up to your own judgment to be honest about. I guess I'm wanting to hear from the two of you about whatever it is you're willing to share. You don't have to go super deep on it, but like what falls into those two camps for you? I know for me, like I'll just go ahead and start. Like discretionary honesty is I'm like, if you have a criticism about my body or appearance,
Maybe don't.
You know, where I'm kind of like, if I really, really, really want your opinion about how my stomach looks or something, I will preface it by saying, yes, I truly want your honest opinion. If I've not prefaced it in that way, I don't want you to be honest if it's negative. That's
Sure.
discretionary.
It's something like unsolicited advice, for example, could be discretionary, because I do think a lot of people immediately jump to saying, oh, I think you should do this in this situation, even if you're just describing something that's challenging in your life.
Sure, yeah.
And that is maybe them being honest about how they feel and about how they want to help you in that moment. But I don't necessarily think that they should be doing that. And ideally, I would want to prompt you for your help and your honest opinion on something.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think in that moment, that's like discretionary, for example. I think that there are types of relationships where, yes, it is important to be really honest about your finances or about how you handle money, things like that. If you are able to discuss with a partner about how you deal with your own finances or how you deal with household, for example, those are the types of obligatory honesty things that are important and beneficial to a relationship to know.
Yeah, looking at this list here, the one about like, I don't need to know everything my partner is doing daily, something that we've talked about on this show before in the context of non-monogamy, and that's still where I stand on this, is like if my partner has sex with somebody else, I would put into obligatory honesty, I want to know that you had sex with someone else. So whatever kind of sex it was, like I want to know, broadly speaking, what that is. But the discretionary honesty is like, I don't want to know the details. It really doesn't matter to me. It's not my business. That's just not part of the relationship for me. And other people go about that differently, about how much they want to know in either direction. Sometimes it's like, I don't want to know at all anything. or, very little, or some it's like, I want every detail. But for me, it's like, yeah, I don't need to know all that. That's not my business. So like, that's one that clearly for me goes into that discretionary honesty category. And I would say on the flip side, also, I'm not willing to tell you that. Even if you are someone who wants all that, I'm like, well, I don't think this is going to work then. If that's what you need, because I don't want to tell you all those details. I don't feel like I should tell you all those details. And I don't want to then obligate all of my other partners to be okay with me sharing all that with you. I don't want to do that. So that to me would go into like, not even a discretionary honesty, but like this is not a thing you get to have all the answers to.
Yeah, some of the things on this list, I feel like are more entwined than the three of us tend to be in our relationships, or ask for more types of intense entwinement. We probably are not going to say, yeah, it's okay for my partner to like check personal stuff or text messages or something, or that you need to know where they are at all times, for example. I think that might be the case in certain relationships, but there's a level of personal autonomy that is, I think, present often in perhaps some of the relationships that I want, for example, that allows for a sense of I am a person that gets to exist by myself and not necessarily only within the confines of a couple.
Right.
And that needs to be okay with someone. It doesn't mean that I'm being dishonest, but it just means I get some things just for me and for the other relationships that I have in my life. And you don't need to know absolutely everything about them.
It's funny. I'd never thought about this specifically in terms of obligatory and discretionary honesty, but I almost feel like there needs to be this third category of kind of like I was saying, like, these are things that you will just not get from me. It's not like at your discretion, but just, this is a no.
Well, just privacy?
Like I said.
Yeah, privacy.
Yeah, like privacy. Yeah, like the sexual details thing I mentioned, or, one of the ones here in the obligatory section was, I should know where my partner is at all times. That I would say for myself, and probably a lot of people I know, it'd kind of be more, if you always think you should know where I am, this isn't going to work out. I'm not okay with that being a requirement. It's not to say I'll never tell you where I am, but like, this is hard and fast. This cannot be required of me, kind of a thing.
We'll get it more into this later, but I do think it is about finding people who match with you.
Totally.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's some people who will totally agree. Yes, I should know where my partner is at all times.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And if those two people are together in a relationship, then like, great. If that's what works for you, then awesome.
Yeah. These kinds of discussions are something that come up somewhat often, actually, in our monthly video processing and peer support sessions that we have with patrons. So that's for people on our Patreon at the $9 and up level. Each month, we have these monthly video calls where you get to get on and share what's going on in your life. Get to have other people in real time to bounce the ideas off of, get feedback on things, help develop where you stand on certain issues that are murky, that it can be hard to figure out. And it's just been so cool to get to have these groups. It's just really neat seeing how compassionate and how helpful and how empathetic this group can be when working with each other. It's really amazing. If you would like to be part of that, and of course, support this show and help us keep this content coming out into the world for everyone for free every week, you can go to patreon.com/multiamory and you can join there and check out all the various benefits you can get as a thank you. And then, of course, if you can take a moment, check out our advertisers here. If any of them seem interesting to you, please do check them out. Use our promo codes and links, because that does directly tell them that it's worth it to keep supporting our show, and that will help us keep good sponsors and keep this show going.
Welcome back from the break. We are going to dive into why do people avoid being honest. We've shared some of our personal experiences with that, but I found this really fascinating study from 2013. This is by Jennifer Guthrie and Adrian Kunkel. It's titled, Tell Me Sweet and Not So Sweet Little Lies.
Yeah.
Deception in Romantic Relationships. This was published in Communication Studies. So this study, they looked at a group of undergrad and graduate students, not just undergrads.
Wow. What a range.
I know. So specifically, it was undergrad and grad students who were in romantic relationships. And the mean length, the average length was about 2 years that they'd been in these relationships. they had them record in a diary for 7 days every time that they intentionally deceived or misled their romantic partner. Now, a funny side note about this is that they did a little bit of like an orientation with these research subjects, I guess, to lay out some definitions. And they mentioned something about how they didn't call it deception or lying when they were getting them on board because they didn't want that negativity
to bias them.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I think they called it like a negative communication pattern. Like they tried to use more neutral framing or language,
That's
but
clever.
functionally
Yeah.
they described it as essentially deception and misleading, right? And the average at the end of that was 0.7 acts of deception per day. I think if you grabbed a random person off the street and you just asked them, like, how often do you think that you intentionally deceive or mislead your partner?
Maybe someone would be like, once every year or
Right.
once every
Exactly.
quarter or
Maybe once a month. I
every
don't
6
know.
months.
Yeah. And so for me, I was a little surprised. I was like, oh, basically every day.
That's true. Yeah. No, that's true. That it's probably more often than you would guess.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think so much of this happens below the level of conscious thought.
Exactly. It's just like little white lies or
Yes,
something, or
like knee-jerk
"Oh,
stuff.
Yeah, you look great in that hat. Something like that. You're just being nice.
Now, here's what I found super interesting is that they also had the participants record what were their motivations for being deceptive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they found 6 predominant themes that emerged. So we're going to go through each of those 6. We're going to spend some time at the end discussing, do we think that this list missed some things? Do we think there's other motivations that maybe they didn't cover? But we're going to go through each of these. So one of the motivations was what they called engaging in relational maintenance, as in avoiding relationship turbulence. So avoiding confrontation or avoiding suspicion or avoiding a negative reaction. And then I do have some direct quotes here. This one participant said, "Oh, I denied being attracted to a friend. My girlfriend worries too much that I will cheat on her and I don't want her to worry as much."
I would hope that you could be in a relationship where you can discuss attraction, maybe mutual attraction or just attraction to other people in general. But I get that that would be challenging. If the narrative is you're going to cheat on me eventually, then I understand you being like, let's lessen that somehow and say, no, I don't find other people attractive, or this particular person that maybe you're intimidated by attractive, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before about that. Is it literally every fleeting moment of attraction I ever have?
Yeah.
Or is it an ongoing interest? Or is it just the acknowledgement that, yes, I find people attractive in general rather than specifically this person? Because it is that. Are you telling me this because you want to do something about that?
Well, okay, but I don't want us to get too hung up on this specific example.
Sure.
This is just one example that was under the umbrella of it's about avoiding causing conflict, which is very common. That would probably fall under a little bit of the self-preservation banner. But also what they considered this kind of deceiving in order to do relational maintenance, also things like trying to elicit positivity by lightening the mood or making your partner happy. And the example that they gave was this direct quote, "I told her I was having a good time when I really wasn't. I know it is important to her that I get along with her work friends."
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's a big day, if it's a big day for your partner and you're like not feeling it, but that's not going to help the situation.
Like, yes,
it's
I
like,
loved
okay.
sitting next to your mom the whole time. It was so great.
Sure.
Well, maybe at some point you could be a little more honest about that. But in the moment, I think it's that kind of, I don't want you to make this about me, I guess. It's like, yeah, I want to be here to support. And then maybe later can talk about, I had a little bit of a hard time, but I'm glad that I did it because it was important to you, or something when you can take that time.
Yeah. Some other things also, like trying to evoke negative feelings in the other person, such as trying to elicit jealousy in them.
So
Trying
lying
to,
about
oh.
something to try to make you jealous.
Okay, but again, this is all under the banner of relational maintenance, right? And so if it's this sense of like, I think my partner is drifting away, I'm worried about preserving the relationship. Maybe if I talk about this hot guy that I hung out with last week, maybe that's going to cause, and maybe I didn't actually hang out with that hot guy or whatever. Like maybe that's going to spark some jealousy so that my partner will come back to me. I'm not saying any of this is good. Like this is just the reasons why we do messed up stuff that we do sometimes. And then this one was interesting, that restoring equity and harmony after a perceived relational transgression. This is the example. Quote, I wanted to make him know that I was really upset about a rude comment. By telling him I cried, he felt more sorry. And now by telling him, I think this person meant lying about the fact that they cried. Yes, in order to make them feel more sorry.
Like, so you take me seriously. I'll exaggerate a little bit. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
I've been there.
Sure. Yeah. God, this is fascinating. Like hearing much more candid explanations than I think people would give in another context.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Well, and it's interesting because that self-preservation extends to our own thought processes about why it is that we're doing something in the moment. Because we're justifying it to ourselves. We're being like, I'm not going to go there because it's going to make my life harder if I say what I really think or what I really mean. And yeah, you're exactly right. Hearing it in this context, like kind of hearing the reasoning behind it is just really fascinating. And I would hope that all of us could maybe stop and think before we decide to be deceptive, like, what is the reasoning behind this? Why are we actually doing this? What are we longing for, Dedeker?
Exactly. The question that I love to ask. I am hoping that by going through just like giving people listening examples of motivations about why, that can help to unlock something. Because again, so much of this stuff comes from just a knee-jerk reaction where we don't even have time to think about it. And if we get some more clues about why I feel the urge to omit information in this context, or why I feel the urge to not be honest in that context, that maybe I can understand why, then I can set to solving that for that why in a way that doesn't have to necessarily involve deceiving. So another theme that emerged was what they called managing face needs. You know, doing some...
What a weird term.
Some exfoliating, some extractions, a nice clay mask, some serums.
Sheet mask time.
Yes. No, so managing face needs as in either preserving positive face, which is either supporting your own feelings or your partner's feelings and your sense of self-presentation, or preserving negative face, as in like avoiding unwanted activities or impositions or avoiding negative ways of being seen, right? So examples of preserving positive face, and again, this is a person's example. We didn't write this. Quote, she asked me if I thought her cheeks were getting fatter. I kind of did, but I told her no. I didn't want to hurt her feelings.
Sure. I mean, we kind of touched on that earlier. Where you're like, don't give me the raw truth. Yeah.
Totally. Discussion of body. No, thank you.
Or this example of saving positive face. Quote, I don't want him to ever view me as dumb.
It's like admitting a mistake or...
Right. So like lying about a mistake, or maybe I feel like this could be the like lying, pretending like, oh yeah, I knew that thing, like that fancy word that you dropped. Oh yeah. Yeah, I totally... Right. You know, because you don't want to be seen as being dumb or uneducated or things like that. Now, the negative face one, the example they gave for this one is they said, you know, one such participant deceived her partner about why she, quote, could not go over to his house one night. She wrote, quote, I didn't feel like going over to his house, but didn't want to hurt his feelings. So this is about like avoiding some kind of negative imposition or activity that you don't want to take part in. And so instead of just being able to say to someone...
So you lie?
Yeah, instead of just saying, I don't know, I don't really feel like hanging out with you right now, you have to come up with some other reason, like I'm busy, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. Yeah.
That's a tough one because it's such a slippery slope. But it makes sense that it's like we want things to just be easy. We don't want to hurt feelings, and so we'll do it. But sometimes we can then get ourselves into bigger trouble later. That one's so fascinating because it is... so common, I think, that I want to save someone's feelings, and so I'll fib a little bit or protect them from my real reason, or just I don't want to have to justify why I just don't want to, or why I just don't like this, so instead I'll make some excuse. Yeah, I think that's one we all do all the time, and it's kind of considered normal and polite.
It's so normal, yes.
But it's also this slippery slope. I think that a good example of this was something actually from How I Met Your Mother way back in the day, and it was about where the character Robin, at some point, just to sort of save someone's feelings or whatever, agreed that like, oh, she liked having her left knee tickled. That was their silly example. I think it was like a proxy for faking an orgasm type thing, or pretending you like something sexually that you don't. But it was like the lefty likey, like lefty like that was like the thing. And it ended up being the whole joke in the show is that like years and years later, that partner shared with her current partner, like this is a thing she likes. And so she's doing that. And then finally has to come clean to both of them of like, I've never liked this. I've always thought it was stupid. I just did that to save your feelings that one time. And now it's become this thing for years now. And it just reminds me of that like slippery slope that a little nicety can get you into.
It's reminding me of Hyperbole and a Half. The woman who writes or did the comic Hyperbole and a Half shared this story of like in her childhood, one time she was able to impress the adults around her because she could have a spoonful of hot sauce and didn't freak out about it. And then it became this whole thing that everyone thought that she loved hot sauce and would constantly gift her hot sauce, all these family members. And like her dad would parade her out to be like, oh my God, look at what my kid can do. And she like never liked hot sauce.
Oh gosh.
But she never corrected anybody about it. She got stuck. Yes.
Yeah.
Yikes.
So the next theme was negotiating dialectical tensions.
Now, at risk of you thinking I'm stupid, I could not parse that sentence and get meaning out of just that.
Well, I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, it was like
about it.
Like different dialects of the language.
You pretend that you speak a language that you don't actually understand. I do that a lot when I'm in Japan sometimes.
A different dialect of a language that you don't understand.
Right. I see. It's when you're like an American dating a British person and you just pretend you understand the weird shit that they say.
Exactly. And you're like, yeah.
When he's like, oh, I'm knackered and I'm all hoggledy-boggledy. And you're just like, sure.
You're like, totally. I feel you.
100%, bro. Yeah.
I'll be honest, I also couldn't tell you what dialectical tensions are, but I can give you the examples, which maybe make it easier to understand. So they included things like balancing autonomy versus connection. So for instance, they shared an example of someone who told a lie in order to secure more alone time. Now, this feels very closely related to that lie about why I don't want to go over to your house.
Yeah.
That, especially with dating and romantic relationships, we're so enculturated to feel like once we reach a certain amount of closeness, all of our time belongs to each other. And like by default, if we have free time, we got to spend it together. And then that can lead some people to feel this pressure that instead of being able to say, hey, I just need some alone time, that they have to be like, oh, I need to leave the house for this, or no, I'm busy that night, or whatever, in order to be able to preserve that sense of autonomy.
I've definitely had some relationships where I've felt like that, where it's like I can't just ask for it or say that I want it without hurting their feelings. And so I do have to make an excuse or something. Those weren't relationships that ended up lasting, which maybe is telling in itself. I don't know.
Sure.
That is something that I said to a new partner very early on in our relationship. If you ever need a night off, just let me know. Just be honest about it.
Nice.
I think setting those expectations up front. Because, with the NRE, you want to hang out with a person all the time, but there's going to be a point where you need your friggin' space.
Yeah.
Now, I thought this one is cute because on the flip side of autonomy, they put connection. And they share this example where a person used deception in order to get more connection. So, quote, I told this little lie so that I could spend a few more minutes with him driving back to my place. It usually drives me nuts to waste time like that, but it never hurts to spend a few more minutes together.
I want to know what the lie was.
I don't know. Was it like, oh, actually take the freeway, it'll be faster when it's not faster? Or
yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. I can totally, if you need to swing by the gas station, that's fine. I'll wait, like, oh, that was
like,
cute.
oh, there's some construction. We've got to go around this other way.
Right.
Yeah, something.
Right. So other dialectical tensions include things like balancing openness versus closedness. So for instance, some people talked about how I omitted this information or I told this lie because that's not any of his business or that's just private information. Now, they didn't have any examples of someone being deceptive in service of trying to get more openness from the other person, but they're like, theoretically, that could be possible. Like I could maybe tell a story that makes me seem more vulnerable than I actually am or more open than I actually am in the hopes that then the other person will be more open or vulnerable. That starts to get into a weird sort of mind game kind of manipulative approach, I suppose. But that's openness versus closedness. And then they also talked about balancing novelty versus predictability. So for instance, a lot of people shared how they deceived a partner in order to surprise them with dinner plans or with gifts or with trips. That's pretty common. And we don't tend to find that very threatening or very morally reprehensible necessarily. On the flip side, they shared how one participant's partner made some novel plans with a friend. So to me, I read that as that was out of the routine that this couple was used to. Their partner made plans with friends for the Super Bowl, but she deceived him in order to, quote, just be casual and watch it with him alone as they had done the previous year. So there's not a ton of details around the situation, but something where it's like this person told a lie or did something deceptive in order to get their partner back into predictability and routine. So it could have been something like, oh no, like I got to be at home because I've got to take care of this thing, like with the, I don't know, the plants or whatever. So I can't leave. I don't know without them giving details.
Right.
But I do think that being motivated to lie or deceive in order to preserve a sense of routine or predictability, that's often tied to safety for people. And I think this is actually a lot more common than maybe most people would admit to.
Absolutely.
Especially because, I mean, I'm biased because I spend all my time working with a lot of people who are like opening up their relationships for the first time. And there can be a power struggle around trying to maintain a sense of like routine and predictability.
Fascinating. I will be honest with you about something that I did just look up what dialectical means.
Oh, will you illuminate all of us so that we can stop lying to other people about how smart we are?
Right. So it seems like there's a couple different uses of it, but basically it comes down to two different people holding different views or different beliefs, kind of related to our episode last week. It comes up either in terms of a debate or a dialogue, like the dialectic being each person holds a different opinion or a different belief, and we're going to talk in a certain way to try to understand each other and resolve that. Or it can be two opposing things that can both be true. And I think that might be what they're getting at
that makes
here.
more sense. Yeah. All of the DBT therapists listening are just like yelling
Cringing
at us.
it. Yeah,
so cringing
sure.
and
So
frustrated. Yes.
So sorry.
Okay. So there's three more categories, three more dominant themes that emerged as far as people's motivations around lying. One was establishing relational control. You know, this is going to start getting a little uncomfortable. So as in like acting coercive, like making sure that your partner behaves or feels the way that you want them to. One participant noted that he deceived, quote, to make her feel bad about sleeping all day and getting nothing done in the hopes that she would be more productive. Or, quote, a friend of mine who gets along really well with my girlfriend kept texting me about getting lunch and watching the game together, us three. I ignored his texts and didn't tell my girlfriend because she probably would have wanted to hang out if she knew.
I see, and was worried that his friend is too into his girlfriend or something like that.
Maybe there's that, or maybe he's just feels a little threatened by their connection or just didn't want to, or maybe it's not even anything that untoward. It's just he didn't feel like hanging out all three of them and so decided to not tell his girlfriend that his friend was asking about that.
Would like gaslighting behavior sort of fall under this? Again, I don't know if gaslighting is always done
intentionally.
Yes, if you know absolutely that that's what's going on, or if it's more of an underlying thing that you're doing to get your way or to coerce or to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a certain amount of like, my partner's not behaving the way that I think that they should, or like they're not feeling the way that I think that they should, so I need to find a way to convince them to change their behavior or to feel a particular way, then I'd probably put it under this. Because it's all about trying to control to a certain extent. And then the last two, one of them was continuing previous deception. So as in the reason was I told a lie before, and so I have to keep lying in order to maintain it, right?
Yeah.
And then the last one was unknown, that there were some participants that couldn't identify their motivations for particular lies. There were some examples in the study where, I don't know, this person wrote, like I went to the movies by myself and I didn't tell my partner, and I have no idea why I didn't tell them. There was no reason to not tell them. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that can start to get, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, like that could start to get into maybe there's something pathological here. Maybe there's some unexamined reaction or something here that's going on. But sometimes that does happen.
Yeah, or that it just was one of these other reasons, but they weren't kind of self-aware enough in that situation to identify it as maybe this is like trying to reclaim some independence. But that's like kind of a hard abstract concept for someone to identify in themselves if it's not such a strong feeling. So they're like, I don't know, I just did it.
Yeah. I think there are a couple other reasons that people will struggle with honesty that this study doesn't cover. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. Like things like if you have a difficult history with honesty from your family of origin, like this didn't really address that you may just have some like prior trauma or some prior patterns programmed into you that haven't been unknit quite yet. Something that I've noticed in working with clients is that sometimes people can have assumptions or projections based on how they think that the other person is going to react to certain information that may not be true, right? So they may have a sense of, oh, I cannot share this because my partner's going to react poorly, when maybe that's not actually the case. Or they project, like they say, oh, if somebody shared this information with me, I would be really upset. And so I'm assuming that my partner feels exactly the same as I do. And so therefore, I'm not going to share. And some of this boils down to some unclear expectations about that, like, what do I consider obligatory versus what do I consider discretionary?
Yeah, I also feel like a lot of the explanations they gave, to me, read as a bit manipulative. And I don't always mean that in a negative sense, but like their reasons, engaging in relational maintenance or managing face needs or, negotiating tensions between what they want and what they think they can say. But I also think just, shame, being ashamed of something yourself could be a reason. And I guess they would probably put that under the managing face needs, like kind of saving face in a situation, like not wanting to come across as dumb or, not wanting to embarrass yourself some way. But I kind of feel like it's a little bit different than, not telling her that her cheeks were looking fatter or whatever the example was, right? I think that's a little different from I was ashamed of this thing that I felt or thought or did. And so that's why I'm hiding it. So I could say that might be another category.
I talked about this at the top of the episode, the kind of unsafe environment for sharing honesty. If there is a pattern of real upset or even anger or abuse in a relationship, perhaps, if you share something that is met with maybe dismissiveness or defensiveness, and you realize, hey, it's not worth it to be honest in this moment, then I can see that being a reason that they didn't really discuss here as to why you don't decide to really share something in exactly the way that you feel that it should be shared, maybe.
So before we go on to what we can do about this, what are some steps we can take? We're going to take another quick break to talk about a couple sponsors for this show. And also to remind you, if you hate ad breaks, you can always become a $7 patron. And then you get a separate feed where you get early releases of episodes and you get them without any ads in them. And of course, then that goes directly to help support our show. But even if you don't, it's really important to us that this show is available to everyone out there in the world for free on their podcast players or just straight in their web browser on their RSS feed or on our website. And the way that we do that is with our ads. So please take a moment, check them out. If they seem interesting to you, use our promo codes, use our links. It really does directly help support our show because these advertisers picked us and we picked them as ones that we think you might be interested in. So give them a try. It does directly help support our show.
And we're back. And finally, we want to discuss what can be done about all this. If you feel like you have a bit of an honesty problem, maybe give yourself a bit of a reality check. Check, is this even really a problem for me? Is this something that comes up in my life that I find, yeah, okay, maybe I do have a little bit of a problem with honesty? So ask yourself, has my lack of honesty or disclosure caused conflict in my relationships, or has it disrupted any connection between myself and my partners or other important people in my life? And then if you realize that it hasn't, ask yourself, has my lack of honesty or disclosure caused stress or pain internally for myself? I think that's a really big one, because if you're carrying around the knowledge that you have been dishonest with a partner and you realize, hey, that's actually causing a lot of shame and causing a lot of pain internally, then maybe that's a reason to try to become more honest with someone.
I'd say another one to consider for this is if you're doing a lot of this, a little bit of dishonesty for the sake of keeping everybody else happy, but it's just adding a lot more mental work for you to constantly be keeping track of that or feeling like you're not really expressing yourself. So it might not even be, I feel guilt about this, but maybe you're kind of putting yourself in a place of doing a lot more emotional and mental labor that no one's asking you to do.
Well, that reminds me of not coming out, for instance. If you find I'm really having a difficult time at work or a difficult time with certain people in my life because they don't know the real me, that's being dishonest potentially for self-preservation. But I guess you can weigh kind of the pros and cons there. Is that more challenging in my life to not tell everybody who I really am versus would it be worse if they knew? And would I be seen as other, or would that be more challenging in my life? So something to think about there. The next thing that can be done about this is the honesty rewind. So that is to look to your past and family of origin, do a journaling exercise or a conversation exercise. So ask yourself, how was honesty encouraged or discouraged in my family growing up? And then ask yourself, how is dishonesty encouraged or discouraged in my family of origin growing up? And finally, how did I see my caregivers acting honest or dishonest? I think if you grew up with caregivers who were dishonest a lot, that probably means that you might see that as something that is easier or more okay to do. And that's something to kind of look at. Like if you saw your parents being super dishonest with each other all the time, maybe you think, hey, that's how partners are towards each other.
Or it could be the opposite. It could
Sure.
be, I saw them be dishonest, and so I have a zero tolerance, like you have to be like brutally honest all of the time, right?
Totally.
Either way, though, examining it, doing the honesty rewind can be really helpful. This is one that I still struggle with thinking about. For me, it was specifically in my family, our relationship to my grandparents on my mom's side, who are very conservative, had very strong opinions about what you should and shouldn't do based on their religious beliefs and also just their opinions that they felt like were facts. And so there was a lot of, hey, this is a thing we're not going to talk about around grandma and grandpa. Or if they ask about this topic, have an answer prepared, like what church you're going to now that you've moved to LA or something, to just be like, we don't want to deal with it, so let's just not. And that was like, that's how we did it for all of my life that I can remember, right? And obviously the things we might be dishonest about changed over time. But there was this sense of like, this is just not worth it. You're going to make it hard for all of us. So let's just all avoid these things or lie a little bit about these things, whatever it is. And it's, I don't know, I still struggle with that one because it's like, I might see myself doing that in certain areas, like with work colleagues or something where I'm like, maybe I could be taking more risks and being a little more authentic and honest, but that's how I was brought up. So it's definitely a good thing to examine and understand ourselves a little better.
Yeah, I for sure. There's a long family history on my mom's side of the family of control of information being the name of the game. So like, oh, my entire 36 years that I've been on this earth, I've had to deal with having family members tell me, okay, well, your grandfather decided to give the car to your uncle, but don't tell your aunt. Don't tell your aunt, okay? Or like, okay, well, your aunt decided to give some money to this person. Don't tell this list of 6 people in the family.
That sounds
right?
exhausting.
Oh my God, yes, extremely exhausting. To this day, control of information, like there's always a sense of who gets to know and who doesn't get to know, sometimes very benign things.
Why?
Oh, Emily, we'll be here all night.
This is a whole other episode.
This is
Yeah.
a whole
Okay.
other thing.
Why does Dedeker's family do X? Okay.
And I can also, have some theories about how that's influenced my relationship to
I'm
honesty
sure.
and to
I'm
controlling
sure.
information and who gets to know what and all that stuff. But the whole point of this, though, is that like, if you do this exercise, you're going to find some valuable information because at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be something traumatizing or truly morally reprehensible that your caregivers and family did. But that's how you got socialized about what is okay to be honest about and what is not. Seeing your mom talk to a lady in the parking lot that she knows and being all smiley and nice. And then as soon as she gets in the car, and she's like, oh my God, that lady talks too much, right? Like that's how we learn as kids when to be honest and not. There's going to be information here. This next one I call the self-acceptance supercharge. And I think this is especially true that if you're someone who tends to be dishonest in service of covering up some embarrassment or shame, that it's really helpful to work on inviting in self-acceptance. I was thinking about this recently because there was an Ask Amy column where this woman wrote in, she just got into a new relationship with a guy and she's really excited about it, but then she just learned that she snores and she's super embarrassed about it. And like, while she's trying to go to the doctor and figure it out, she's mortified about the idea of having this guy spend the night and find out that she snores. And Ask Amy is basically kind of like, well, you just got to tell him that that's the case and hope that he's okay with it, right? Like if it's a good enough relationship, the two of you will figure it out, right? And that's not going to be the most important part of you. But I really loved this quote. She says, quote, if you can't imagine being so frank, then my advice prerequisite is to work toward crossing the honesty threshold. Learn to accept yourself before you worry about whether anyone else accepts you. You might be surprised by how much of the hard work of relationships is behind you once you complete that first step.
Woof.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh, wait a minute. All this honesty stuff is actually about me.
Right.
Yikes.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Yes.
No thanks, Amy. You can fuck right off.
So I think it's good to think about, are there parts of yourself that you constantly feel the need to hide or to shrink or obfuscate or sugarcoat in order to be loved? And the answer is yes.
Jase and I are like,
Yeah, we're nodding along. Yeah.
Everybody does. Everybody has something that they feel like makes them unlovable. I think this is very common in particular for people who are non-monogamous or have been for a while, who've experienced a lot of rejection around that, or maybe they themselves haven't quite accepted that this is who they are. That often leads to people being maybe sketchy or like not upfront with people about the fact that they're non-monogamous, like all that stuff. But whatever it is for you, I invite you to think about, if you fully accepted this particular part of yourself, how would that change the way that you talk about it or share about it? Just to imagine, see if you can even envision that version of yourself that fully accepts what you think are the embarrassing, unlovable parts.
Wow.
I know the two of you look so uncomfortable.
No, but really.
No, actually, I think it's great.
Advice.
It is good.
It's just
I hate
advice.
it. It's good. Yeah. Okay.
We hate it, but yeah.
This next one we call the honesty agreements, or come up with your honesty agreements. And this is one to have with your partner. And this is about those obligatory and discretionary honesty things that we talked about from that study earlier. And just to have that conversation, if you haven't ever had it, or if you haven't had it recently, of what are the types of information that each of us thinks is obligatory? This has to be shared. And what are the things that we either think should always be private, or that it's like, well, it can be private or not, kind of up to you. And actually have a conversation to get a little bit of clarity on those, because it's very possible that for one of you, something could be obligatory, and for another person, that could fall into the discretionary category. And so this might take some time to discuss, but the point of it is to see where we might differ, and then also to talk about that and try to understand it. I have found for myself, when having these sorts of conversations, I think they tend to come up more often when you're becoming non-monogamous, because then there's more stuff that we normally just don't ever have to talk about, or are told we should never talk about, that suddenly we need to talk about. But often, if you do find that you disagree on something, like on whether or not this thing should be shared, if you talk a little bit more about the why and kind of what's the purpose of either sharing or keeping that private, you might find, oh, okay, no, actually, we're not as far off as we thought. There's this part of it that needs to be obligatory, but this other part of it that can be discretionary. So just having that discussion is really important, so you don't end up in a situation where one of you is keeping something that they think is okay to keep and the other feels betrayed by that, or you're sharing stuff that the other feels like you shouldn't, and so now they feel like a weird, why are you telling me this when like this isn't something I'd think I would tell you unless I had some meaning behind it. So honesty agreements, talk about those, get a sense of where you both stand. And it is best to have this conversation when you're not actively in conflict. This isn't right after there's been some big breach of disclosing or not disclosing things. Ideally, have this before that. If you already do have a history of conflict over this topic, and this is a really charged conversation, this can be a really helpful one to have with a trusted third party, like a coach or a counselor or a therapist or someone like that, to help both of you be more productive in this discussion if it brings up a lot of emotions.
If you find that you're about to be dishonest, you should stop on a dime. This reminds me of something that Jase talked about in our last episode last week. Essentially, if you find yourself being dishonest in an asynchronous conversation, such as like texting, or maybe you're emailing back and forth with somebody, you can catch yourself early on doing that thing or having the urge to do the thing, to lie or obfuscate. So when you first notice that knee-jerk reaction, just stop, halt, take a minute, and then scan your body, scan your mind, scan your feelings, and ask yourself, what's going on inside right now? Is this about me? Is this about, I feel uncomfortable because I'm worried about how my partner will react or how the other person will react? Is it because I'm keeping a lie up that I have had for many, many months? Maybe it's time to come clean in this moment. So this might be a bit of an expert mode, but Kathy Labriola, who's a friend of ours who's been on the show many times, she has a tip to call even that out, meaning say something like, I felt the urge to lie to you just now. That sounds really intense and really amazing if you're able to do that. But that is an interesting thing to maybe even practice, perhaps with somebody that you feel a little bit more comfortable with, or that you feel won't take that personally or take that really badly. If you can tell them, hey, I kind of felt the urge to lie to you, but I'm not going to. I'm going to come clean and tell you what I really am thinking and feeling in this moment.
I think it helps them understand that you feel vulnerable somehow about this, or you're scared about this thing, and that might help them to react in a more compassionate way and be a little bit more understanding. I could see that. Again, depends on context and depends on the relationship, but I like that one. That's interesting.
It doesn't have to be that direct quote. It could just be like, I'm feeling scared about being honest right now.
Yeah.
That's maybe a softer way to put it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you want more tools for this, I highly recommend that you check out our episode 420, Courage for Hard Conversations. So that's one that's really good where you know that you want to be honest with somebody and it still feels scary and intimidating. Go check that out for some more tools that will help you get through that. Also, if you suspect that there might be something compulsive at play, if you suspect that like the way that you're being honest or dishonest has something to do with some prior trauma or some kind of baggage, this is a great topic for one-on-one work with a therapist or a counselor or a coach.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks, we want to hear from you. Our question of the week on our Instagram stories is going to be, when do you struggle to be honest with a partner? And remember, that is completely anonymous. No one's going to know who you are. Feel free to share whatever you like. Again, go check out our Instagram stories to respond to that question. Also, the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is the episode discussion channel that is in our Discord server, or you can post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, or TikTok. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker Winston. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennewerk and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.